how long did it take you to get from doing a couple of trips a day to 100 trips a day?
It took us about a year and a half, almost 2 years, to get to the point where we're taking 100 trips per day.
Welcome back to NEMT Experts. I've got Ayman Bahta with me today, who's had an interesting journey through the NEMT industry. Ayman, you started as an NEMT provider yourself for many years, and now you focus on helping NEMT businesses to win work and to get outsourced dispatching. Ayman, thanks for being with me. How are you doing?
Absolutely. Thanks for having me, Nero. I appreciate it. I'm doing really well.
Good to hear. Ayman, let's start with the beginning of your journey in the NEMT industry. I know you've been in this industry, you did it with family in Texas, an actual NEMT provider. Can you just talk me through the journey of how you started and what you learned?
Yeah, absolutely. So the way the journey started is my uncle had an NEMT company that he was running in California for about 10 years. And he was really looking to expand out into Texas. It was still a relatively untapped market. There was a lot of opportunity there. And, he really wanted to, advance and expand his company out there. But he was in his 60s and he was like, it didn't really make sense for him to uproot his life, and basically start over in a new state and basically build the company up from ground zero once again. Because, it's new brokers, new private pay clinics. You're basically doing everything starting all over. And so he wasn't trying to do that at that point of his life. But, he offered me the opportunity like, hey, if you want to partner with me, we can be 50-50 in Texas. You do the groundwork, I'll help you with my expertise, my experience, getting things off the ground, and, you're going to run things. And I was like, yeah, that's an amazing opportunity. I've always been more like entrepreneurial minded, but I always thought like, I'm gonna have to work in corporate world for a while, raise up some capital, have some money to actually, fund the ideas that I had. And so being able to jump in this without having to do that and with family too, just made a lot of sense. So, I moved out to Houston, and really just trying to work and grow the contracts, grow the private pay clinics, brokers. There were a couple brokers that he was working with in California that said that they were operating in Texas, but I'm sure and a lot of other providers know that you can't really take brokers at their word. They'll tell you anything that they need to tell you to get you operating out there, but it may not necessarily be what they say. So, we went out there and it wasn't the trips we were expecting. We were only taking maybe 2-3 trips per week, and so my job was really, okay, we need to pivot away from these guys and find the private pay opportunities within our city, find other brokers that may not be in California that are in Texas, and really find a way to, increase our trip volume and grow the company within Texas. And so that's really what I focused on. And at the start, I was kind of doing what most providers do, where, you're juggling multiple roles, you're wearing multiple hats. You're a driver, you're a dispatcher, you're doing your marketing, you're doing like everything that a person would do instead of, separating it to different roles. And it's kind of necessary when you start, but, if you want to scale and grow, that's not really a sustainable practice. And so, as we started securing more contracts and getting more companies work with us and things like that, it started being too much. I was dispatching, spending maybe 3-4 hours per day, just scheduling and dispatching. I was also driving, answering calls from my drivers, from the patients, from the clinics. It was just a lot to handle at once. And so trying to find a dispatcher to help me take some of that off my plate was something that I was looking to do. But that's also very difficult. You can go at Upwork, Fiverr, and try to find these VAs that do these kind of things. But NEMT is very, it's very niche, it's very specific. Just because they have general VA work doesn't mean they're going to have the expertise needed for the NEMT industry. And so that was another thing that hurt a lot to get over, and finding the right person to, fit the experience of what we're looking for. But once I found that right person, that really took us, from point A to point, Z, instead of from A to B, because now when I had somebody that I trained and I could trust and rely to take these things off my plate, suddenly I was spending 3-4 hours a day scheduling and dispatching. I wasn't on the phone with the drivers and the clinics. I wasn't on the phone with the brokers. And I was really, once I was able to get more drivers to take the trips off my hands, now suddenly I could focus on growing and getting more trips. And, that's what really skyrocketed our growth and took us from taking only a few trips per day to, at our peak, we were taking over 100 trips per day. And so,
that's immense growth. I want to understand the timeline. Like, when did you start? Like, what year? And how long did it take you to get from doing a couple of trips a day to 100 trips a day?
So I moved to Texas in around September of 2020. So right at the start of COVID. And then it took us about a year and a half, almost 2 years, to get to the point where we're taking 100 trips per day. So around early to mid 2022 is when we really hit that peak. And then at that point, it was just a lot of volume, a lot of work. And that's really, once you scale and when you want to even start scaling, you can't be like, I know a lot of owners have that. I had it myself where you want to do everything yourself. You just don't think anybody could do it as good as you. And that's kind of a natural thought because, you've been there from the start to wherever you got it to that point. You're like, there's nobody who knows all the things that I've gone through to get to this point and knows like all the little nuances and the relationships I have with this driver or how this patient likes to be, treated and all these kind of things. And you just feel like somebody else can't do what you do. But that's the kind of mindset you have to break if you want to scale and grow to another level, because it's just not possible for one person to handle all that if you want to get to those 100 chips per day. And so
let's talk about those unlocks that you had where it's like, hey, you're doing everything yourself, but you know what? If I got to grow, I got to be able to hand off driving to someone else. I got to be able to hand off dispatching to someone else. Maybe I even got to be able to hand off securing new contracts to someone else. Like, when did those things happen? And can you talk us about the details about it?
Yeah, those things really unlocked for me once we were taking over 10 trips per day. Because that's the point where I think like up to 10 trips, a lot of owners can do it themselves and probably should do it themselves. It doesn't really make sense to outsource at the early stages because then you're just spending money on things that are not out of your capacity yet. Once we got over 10 trips per day and I was still driving and doing other things, that's when I was starting to see a bit of drop in the quality where the missed call started to increase because either I'm on a call with somebody else, like another driver or another patient or another clinic trying to figure out what's going on, and I'm missing a call from somebody else, or I'm driving and I can't answer the call while I'm driving. And so first the missed call started to rise, the quality of the driving, because sometimes, I'm seeing these missed calls while I'm driving and I'm glancing at my phone and, things like that. So when you start to see the quality drop, usually I saw it around 10 to 15 trips is where you need to take a step back and, drop the ego and say, hey, I can't do it all myself. I need to find somebody who can help me with this. And you can do your part to train them and make sure that they understand the steps and the processes that you have to make things run how you want them. But you just can't do it yourself unless you want the quality to suffer. And obviously, if the quality suffers, you're not going to grow anyway.
What are the biggest learnings that you had when you passed off those responsibilities of driving, dispatching, getting new contracts, answering the phones with their existing customers? Like, what are the pain points you experienced? Because of course, nothing is ever a smooth process, right? You do, and you feel like you do it better than anyone you can hire. How did you get past whatever kinks there are in bringing on someone new to fulfill your roles?
Yeah. So the first thing is not micromanaging. You have to trust that the people that you're hiring can do what you're hiring them to do. And that goes to the process you have when you're hiring people. Make sure you're asking the right questions, making sure you're actually bringing on board the right people. If you're just doing like, a very lazy interview, or you're not asking the correct questions to, find different things that are critical to your business, then you're not going to bring on the right person. And then they're not going to do what you need them to do anyway. And then it's just another headache on your plate. So the first thing is making sure that you're bringing on the right people. And the second thing is making sure that you have documented, procedures and processes in place. So, when you're bringing somebody in, they need to know, they don't know what they don't know. So you need to let them know everything that you know. You need to have it written down and documented so they can reference first, that they can use for training when you're training them personally. And then when you're not there to help them, they need to know, like, okay, if this happens, if X happens, I need to go to Y. If A happens, I go to B. And just having these documented systems in place that they can refer to will help them. It'll be like you're there even when you're not there. And so, that's something I kind of learned, through time. First, I was just trying to bring on people. Once we got to like 15, 20 trips, I was like, okay, I can't do it. I need to bring somebody in quickly. And then doing that obviously didn't help because I didn't vet them correctly. And so going through that turnover until I found the right person was that first headache. And then when I bring that right person in, they're still asking me a lot of questions to say, okay, here's the common questions they keep asking me. Here's the things that I know. Let me document this so they can refer to it, and having these structured, processes and procedures in place that they can refer to.
Makes sense. And let me ask you this. In 2022, when your NEMT was at the peak volume of trips that you were doing, how many vehicles were you operating with? And if you can share, what were your sort of revenue numbers?
So at our peak, we were at around, I believe, like 12 to 13 vehicles, maybe give or take one or two. We were around around 12 to 13 vehicles. And for revenue, honestly, I don't remember revenue because in my eyes, I never really cared about revenue. To me, the bottom line is all that mattered. All I care about is profit. Because if I'm making, $1 million, but, my profit margins are like 5%, what does that really matter? So I know that for our profit, we were making mid 5 figures a month. So, very, very healthy profit margins. So that was really good.
Nice. And a good way to think about it.
Yeah.
So, Ayman, After all of this, you decided, hey, you know what? I've figured out the process for how to win contracts with brokers and with facilities. And I've also figured out the process of outsourcing dispatching, which is one of the huge time sucks of running an NEMT business. Talk me through the process of you deciding, hey, you know what? Instead of running an NEMT business now, I'm just going to help other NEMT businesses do these two things that I've figured out how to do really well. And you started this company, Apex, which helps NEMT businesses do exactly that.
Exactly. So really what got me to that was, once we were at our peak, like I mentioned, we were taking over 100 shifts per day. I wasn't actually working that much on the day-to-day. I was working at most 2 to 3 hours per day, sometimes even less than that. So it was mainly just trying to find, new brokers to work with, or for the brokers or clinics we work with, if they have other locations in different cities, find ways to expand to those cities. And so that was the main workload at that point. And it was only, like I said, 2-3 hours a day max. And so I was really looking for the next challenge. I was like, I have just so much time available, and, I'm looking for the next thing to do. And building on my current knowledge base, it made a lot of sense because of the experience that I built up and the knowledge I built up through these, like you said, with the relationships with the brokers in clinics, and also outsourcing dispatching. It was just like a natural transition. Like, I knew that the problems that I went through were obviously a common pain point that other people going through, not only through my own experience, but, in the NEMT industry, I've built connections going to conferences like NEMTAC, TTC, things like that. You meet other, transportation providers as well, and hearing these common pain points that people go through, and understanding that, okay, this is something common that people are experiencing, and maybe I can help them with from what I've learned. And so that's when I stepped out from my role from the NET company and decided to move on to Apex. And that really brought me where I am today, where I'm, like you said, helping company transportation provider owners really outsource their dispatching, because that is, in my experience, the two biggest, costs for people are your insurance, your driver pay, and then your dispatching. Those are going to be your 3 biggest costs from what I've seen. And so if we could find a way to reduce your dispatching costs and take off the time strain that you have, then that's going to be something that you can redirect to growing your business and focus on scaling your company. And so that's really what we are focusing on today.
Okay. So outsourcing dispatching, that's one of your big pillar areas. The other two are helping NEMT businesses expedite their process of getting contracted with brokers in their area. And the third one is helping NEMT businesses to win private pay contracts with healthcare facilities in their area. And I want to touch on all 3 of these things, starting with the healthcare facilities. Can you talk about like what you guys do to actually help NEMT businesses win those lucrative contracts with facilities in their area?
Yeah, so we kind of bundled together the broker and the facilities into one thing we just call credentialing. Obviously, the process of getting partnerships with these brokers and with these private pay clinics around your city. So what we do is we have one dedicated dispatcher that we will assign to this company, and what they'll do is they're going to go ahead and make a list of all the dialysis clinics, nursing homes, hospitals, offices within your area, within a 30 to 40 mile radius, and just compile a list of all those. Once they have those, we have a set template that we've built out for people for the outreach. So the process consists of 2 to 3 phone calls within 2 weeks, and then also 3 emails with the follow-ups, going all of them. And so making sure you're just reaching out to these clinics, these nursing homes, and just making sure that they understand that you're there. A lot of times they do already have, partnerships with other transportation providers, which is a common theme people come across. And one of the things is that this is one of the secret sauce that I'll share with you guys here. What we do is we'll tell first you need to build a relationship with the case manager at these facilities. And so, once you've had a conversation with them, and a couple conversations, and you find out, hey, they already have somebody in place, they don't really need a person at the time, we just tell them, hey, this company, company X is, we're still available. We understand you guys have a partner. In the future, if you guys have times where maybe your current provider is booked up, or you guys have an emergency and you need a last minute trip, feel free to reach out to us. We're always here to help. And then it always happens, there's always emergencies, there's always problems that happen in the industry. They're going to have a time where their current provider is just overbooked, or they can't handle something, and they reach out to you for, hey, we just need this one-off last minute trip. And you just help them once. And then, this happens once or twice, 3 times over time. And they start to say, oh, okay, this person is reliable. We've come to them for emergency a few times, and they've been there to help us. And I'd say at least 60% of the time that gets our foot in the door. And, okay, they remember you now. They say, okay, this person has helped us, and now we can, maybe give them a couple more trips. They either maybe offload some from this current provider, or if they're starting to have more trips available, they start thinking of you, and they say, hey, we have a couple more trips to get you. And then boom, you have your foot in the door, and that's really how you start building those relationships. And then when it comes to the broker model, one thing is through our time, it's been a couple years we've worked, we've just built relationships with people in different broker companies. And so one thing we like to say is we don't make guarantees. We don't want to give people false promises or anything, sell them a dream. We like to be very transparent. We have a process that we follow of the steps, and we have these relationships that we've built. And so we're going to leverage those relationships and these connections, and we're going to introduce the company that you have to them and do what we can to, get your foot in the door. But at the end of the day, if you're in an area that's just very saturated, like, if you're in Orange County or, some places where it's just super saturated and they don't need a provider at the time, there's not much that can be done. But if you're in an area where maybe they are expanding or they don't have as many providers as they need, then those relationships that we have really do help you, stand out over other people.
Okay. I mean, and that is the engine of business, right? Getting actual work to do. Very critical. Can you tell us, do you work largely with NEMT businesses that are just starting up, NEMTs that already have operations, a mix of both? Can you give us sort of like a sense of the scale that your company, Apex, sort of operates at, where across the country you help NEMT businesses, how many NEMT businesses you may be working with at a given time, just to give us a sense of like what all you do?
Yeah. So most of our clients are existing transportation providers that are taking at least 10 trips per day for the dispatching side. So when it comes to the credentialing side, most of the people that come to us are people that are just starting. They've just built their NUT company. They're looking to get some contract. And so for the credentialing side, it's mainly new companies. But the bulk of our clients are from the dispatching side. And one thing is we try to be kind of, we don't just accept anybody, obviously, because if you're just taking on everybody just for the sake of getting company, it doesn't really work best. And we're very clear that Apex isn't for everybody. We don't really take on companies looking for dispatching that are taking less than at least 10 trips per day, just because at that stage, it doesn't really make sense to outsource your dispatching. It doesn't make sense financially, and it doesn't really make sense on our end as well. And now financially on their end, it doesn't make sense for them to be paying to outsource dispatching if they're under 10 trips per day, because it's not at a capacity where the owner can't handle it themselves. And so, we could take them on, we could do it for them, but, we're really in the business of relationships. We're not just trying to make it a quick cash grab. We really want to build relationships with people and let them know that we're here to help companies. We're not just here to make money off of them.
So on the dispatching side, Ayman, there are a lot of NEMT businesses that may be skeptical about outsourcing their dispatching, especially, to a foreign country like the Philippines. What do you think are the main reasons people are skeptical about it or think it might not be a good idea? And what do you say to that?
So I think one of the first things is a common question I would get is like, how well can they speak English? They have this misconception that the person is going to have very broken English or a very thick accent, and they're worried about how that's going to look on their company. And one thing is that I think that's kind of an outdated mindset. A lot of people from the Philippines speak very, very good English. They don't have accents at all, or very minimal accents. They have great vocabulary, extensive vocabulary. They understand the terms of the industry. And so I think that first thing, if you're worried about how they're going to sound on the phone, they're very professional. They're very courteous. They're very knowledgeable of the industry. So you don't really have to worry about that. And then another thing is they're worried about their knowledge and their experience, like how they're going to be able to handle what our company does. Everybody thinks their company is so unique, and to an extent, it kind of is unique, but there's so many overlaps and so many consistencies within this industry that don't change from company to company, So those are the things that we train our people on, and we don't bring people in that are just general VAs. We have an internal pool of candidates that we go through, that we're sourcing, we're interviewing, we're screening, and we're training. And so the people that we have are specifically trained for the NEMT industry. They're not just general VAs. They know the NEMT industry very well. A lot of times they've either worked with us on past clients, or they've worked in the NEMT industry in the past before we interviewed them and brought them on board. And so that experience, fear that people have as well is something that is not a problem with us, because we really vet our people very strongly. And so those are the two common things that we really come across. But when it comes to Apex, that's not something you really need to worry about at all.
Gotcha. And are you able to share with us sort of like the scale at which you operate? Like, how many NEMT businesses have you worked with maybe in the past year, or are you currently working with right now?
So in the past year, we've worked with 6 NEMT companies. We currently have 4 we're working with. And since our company is virtual, we're not constrained to any location. We have clients right now in Georgia, Louisiana, California, Texas, and we worked with people in North Carolina, New York. So, there's no geographical constraints to where we work, and, we've worked with people all across the country. And at this point, we've built processes that we've seen across, multiple different companies. There's, like I said, there's similarities that no matter where you're at, if you're in the NEMT industry, there's things that are the same. And so those common things that we train our people on to make sure they're prepared. Now, of course, there's always going to be specific nuances for each individual company. There's going to be something that's very specific to what they do. Because I mean, if you really want to separate yourself and really grow in this company, you're going to have that differentiation. So that's the one thing that they're always going to have to be trained upon when it comes to these specific companies. But things like dispatching softwares like Bambi, which is that's a very common software we've been seeing with our the clients we work with. I'd say 80% of our clients use Bambi, and so that's something we're very familiar with. We're also familiar with other dispatching softwares, but we just have not come across them as often as we have with Bambi. But we're still familiar with all of those, and so those are just the different things.
All right. And Ayman, I want to do story time. So you ran your own NEMT business for a long time, and now you work with many NEMT businesses across the country. Can you just share us a success story of like an NEMT business that your company Apex has worked with, maybe to help them get their dispatching outsourced, or maybe to help them win contracts with facilities and brokers, and how their NEMT business has been able to grow and how their constraints have been unlocked from getting your help?
Yeah, I mean, the first one that comes to mind is, one of our early clients that we brought on board. He was doing self-dispatching. He was taking around 15 to 20 trips per day. There was a fluctuation. Sometimes it'd be a little less. Sometimes he'd get to 25 to 30, but he was self-dispatching, and he was spending literally 4 or 5 hours per day on the scheduling for the trips the next day, and then answering calls, rerouting drivers, stuff like that. He was spending 4 or 5 hours per day. And so, over a week, he's spending 20 to 25 hours per week just doing dispatching. And I was just taking up so much of his time that he was kind of stagnating. He was at that point for about almost a year at that point. Just, he's basically on that treadmill, on that hamster wheel, just running over and over doing the same thing. And so he was referred to us through a previous client. And, when we brought him on board, immediately within 1 week, we were able to reduce his complete workload. He wasn't doing any scheduling. He wasn't doing any dispatching. And so that's 20 to 25 hours per week that we're just giving back to him that he was spent on growing his company, scaling, building partnerships. We offered the credentialing aspect of what we do, but now that he had these 25 hours per week, he wanted to take it on himself. And so he was able to do that, and he doubled his business within a year. And so, it was just a great success story that it just shows that if you can really just take some of these things off your plate, that they're obviously crucial to your business. It's not to say that, the dispatching is not crucial to your business, but it is an aspect of your business that's not necessarily revenue generating. And it's something that you can, offload to somebody else as long as they're experienced and trained. And so being able to do that for him really helped him, unlock that level of growth and take him to that next level.
Yeah, and those numbers speak for themselves.
Exactly.
Ayman, are there any final thoughts you want to leave the audience with?
Yeah, I mean, a couple things. First thing that is, like I've been, hyping on before, is you really want to make sure that you have processes in place to make sure that, when you bring somebody on board, that they can really understand where to go from there. Now, when it comes to Apex, what we do is, like I said, we do the dispatching, outsourcing, the credentialing like that. And one thing that we really guarantee clients is that if you currently have an in-house dispatcher, just by switching to us, you're going to save a guaranteed 30% on your dispatching costs at a minimum. We built out a whole ROI calculator that we send out to people that really breaks it down, just based off like average, dispatching costs. It varies from state to state, but on average, people are spending around $15 to $17 per hour on dispatchers. And that's in like lower states. If you're in states like California, you're spending over $20, $25 per hour. And so that 30% is on the lower end. You could sometimes even be saving more than that, just switching from an in-house dispatcher. And then when people that are, dispatching themselves, which a lot of people are currently doing, that time savings that you're getting from switching over to a dispatcher is, you can't even really quantify it. As an owner, your time is very valuable. Even if you say your time is worth $50 an hour, which I think is on the low end, if you're saving 3-4 hours a day, that's so much money that you're saving over the course of a year that people are not really quantifying or not really thinking about. But it is really something that you need to think about and consider if you want to grow your business. And those are really like the main things that we want people to understand. That I know it's hard to, let go of the reins a bit of your company, but that's really the only way that you'll be able to scale. And the final thing I want to tell people is that if your business relies on you to survive day to day, you don't own a company, you own a job. So you really want to build systems, you want to delegate, and you want to scale intentionally to make sure that you have a company and a business and not just another job.
That is well said. Owning a company versus owning a job.
Exactly.
Ayman, thank you so much. I'm going to be putting the contact info of Ayman and his company Apex in the description of this video.
Run, Bambi, run.
Awesome.